Hello everyone, this is a quick video lecture on the two literary elements that we're going to be talking about this week, setting and point of view. Now we're reading three stories for this week, an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, at the Round Earth's Imagined Corners, and this is what it means to say Phoenix, Arizona. A lot of words in all those titles. They're both interesting setting stories, they're also interesting point of view stories, and that's why I picked them for this week. Now setting, we probably know as the time, the place, the culture, the context for the story. It's the location. And a work, a short story or novel can have many settings. Certainly if you've seen films, they have many settings. And generally it's three W's. It's the where, it's the when, it's the whether. Now when you're thinking about setting, you can think about it in a few different ways. You can think about it in terms of big picture ideas or small picture ideas, macro or micro settings. Now macro setting pieces are going to be the time period it takes place in, the country that it takes place in. Is it a rural setting? Is it an urban setting? Those kind of big ideas that can be applied to place. Micro setting details are going to be the specific locations, the specific images or images, places that the author ends up highlighting. So for example here, we got, let's do this one. My old dog, Abby. The macro setting picture here is going to be nature. Outdoors. We might even be able to identify a season here, summer. The micro setting details are going to be the moss on the log, the stone behind the dog, the way the sun is filtered through the branches. Macro setting, city. Micro setting, we've got cabs, we've got signs, we've got somebody picking up trash. Now, in terms of setting, there can be two different types of setting. There are backdrop settings and integral settings. Backdrop settings are generalized places. They're usually not as important as character or symbol in a story. It's really just a location for the story to take place. For a backdrop setting, I'd like to think in some stories, you could lift the characters in the story out of the setting and put them into a new setting. It wouldn't change the story that much. Integral settings are essential to understanding the character. They're essential to understanding the conflict. And usually with integral settings, we get loads of detail. Now think back to that first story from week 1, The Interlopers. That was a story about two rival families who've been fighting over a piece of land for 3 generations. And we get a lot of detail about that land, about the trees, about the snow, about the ground, about the light, what season it is. We also find that that setting is integral to the conflict. It's the whole reason for the conflict. And I think that makes that narrow strip of precipitous woodland in The Interlopers an integral setting. You couldn't really lift those two characters, Ulrich and Georg, out of that place and put them somewhere else. Because the setting is what they're fighting over. The setting is why they're there. The land is what they've been battling over for 3 generations. And as we find out at the end, the land comes to be the thing that kills them. In the form of wolves. Now, setting deals with time. And you got to think about what different kinds of time we can talk about. We could talk about clock time. The Interlopers was at night. Calendar time. It was the darkest day of the year, so that's going to be late December. Seasonal time, we're right in early winter there. Historical time, that's interesting for this story. It certainly takes place in near east of the Carpathians, in a time where land ownership was crucial, and families owned big tracts of land. You can talk about environments when you talk about setting, physical and non-physical environments. So physical environment might be like a yellow wall here, or pictures on the wall. Non-physical environment could be the temperature, the tone of a place. And this is the important slide. Remember this one, my friends. We're going to come back to it throughout the semester. What can setting do? What are the functions of setting? How do authors use setting? Well, they can use setting in a number of different ways. First of all, setting can set the mood. It can create how the story feels. And if you think about The Interlopers, it's a tense story. It's a stressful story that is created by the darkness, by the wind, by the loneliness of the two men, by the tree that comes crashing down on them. by the cold temperatures. All that creates a tense mood. Settings can illuminate character. They can tell us about people. Settings can provide conflict. We certainly saw that in the Interlopers. They can act as an antagonist. Again, saw that in the Interlopers. Function as a symbol, meaning a setting can represent an idea or an emotion. An idea maybe that the author wants to get across. And finally, embody theme. Theme is the big idea about life. And sometimes the setting can point us in the direction of what the story is trying to say about life. Now, really quickly, going back to the Interlopers, we got these two men. They've been fighting for 3 generations, those families, over this narrow strip of precipitous woodland. The land isn't even that valuable. The game isn't great for shooting. The trees can't even stand up in a breath of wind. And here we have these two men who've been raised since day one to fight each other for this piece of land. And it even says at one point in the story that the feud might have died down if not for the personal ill will of Geirog and Ulrich, these two men who've really been raised since they were born to kill one another, to fight over this piece of land. In that way, they never had real personal choice or freedom. They never got to decide what they wanted to do for themselves. Their lives were always pointed towards this conflict. They were trapped. And here we read this story where a tree on the land that's been dominating their thoughts their whole life literally comes down and traps them. And that way that tree might be acting in a symbolic fashion. It might be representing what the land has meant to the two men in their life. They're trapped. They're crushed by it. Now, interestingly enough, in that story, once they're trapped, they say some hurtful things to one another, but quickly they come to forgive one another and actually try to work together at the end to get out of this predicament. Some students in the past have thought that they're just trying to work each other to save their lives. Others have said that they really wanted to forgive one another but never had a chance. Others think that maybe they're trying to trick the other into helping them and then they're going to kill them once they've been helped. I like to think that it's a culmination of their life's journey towards getting them there, and then once they're there, they want forgiveness. They want redemption. They're not allowed it. The land comes to destroy them in the end in the form of wolves. And that is not only symbolic, but also maybe pointing towards theme. Maybe Saki wants us to think about who's really in charge in this story. Certainly the two men and their families think they're in charge, but in reality it's nature that comes and is fully in charge of that place. It's the wolves that come, and they're the ones who own the land, not these two families that have been fighting for generations. So maybe the setting in Interlopers is also pointing us towards theme. I think we could say it certainly provides conflict. It sets the mood. I think it acts in a symbolic way, especially that tree. And maybe it's pointing us to a big idea. I want you to think about these functions of setting when you read the stories for this week. An occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, at the Round Earth's Imagined Corners. This is what it means to say Phoenix, Arizona. Think about the home as it's presented at the Round Earth's Imagined Corners. Think about what the main character thinks about in the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. Think about what the reservation means to Victor and Thomas. What the trailer where Victor's father dies means for Victor. What does that trailer tell us about who Victor's dad was? Think about the functions of setting and what the author's trying to do with the setting. Alright, we're going to switch here really quickly to point of view, which is in general who is telling us the story. And in general, we have a narrator. It's a speaker. It's a person who's telling us the story. Now, sometimes that person is in the story. Sometimes they're outside of the story. Sometimes they're only seeing into one character's perspective. Sometimes they're seeing into everybody's perspective. And those make up the kind of different categories of point of view and narration. We can have innocent narrators and unreliable narrators. An innocent narrator is a character who fails to understand the implications of the story. Somebody that doesn't really understand what's happened, they can't comprehend it, they don't know what it means for them. An unreliable narrator is a character who's deceptive, who's either self-deceptive or even deluding the reader or the other characters in the story. We have 3 different types of point of view: first, second, and third person point of view. The first person point of view is somebody in the story telling us the story directly, generally something that happened to them. I went to the store, I bought a candy bar, I went home, I was happy. That's a first person point of view story. Just because I is in a story doesn't make it a first-person point of view story. Think about stories that the characters are speaking directly to the reader, telling them their thoughts, telling them their experiences, telling them what happened to them. That's a first-person point of view story. Now, third person is as common as first-person point of view. The Interlopers was a third-person point of view story. That's somebody outside of the story relating the story to us. And if you think about the ending of that story, there's no way Geirog or Ulrich could tell us that story because they're dead. They got eaten by wolves. So it's a third-person point of view. Now you have four basic types: omniscient, limited, another version of limited, and objective. Omniscient is seeing into everybody's point of view equally. So we're seeing into Victor's head, we're seeing into Thomas's thoughts, we're seeing into other characters' thoughts. This is what it means to say Phoenix, Arizona is a fairly omniscient point of view. We never really get into the father's perspective, but we certainly bounce around between Victor and Thomas. Limited is seeing into one major character or one minor character, meaning you're not going to have that global view of everyone's thoughts and ideas. And objective is not seeing into anyone's thoughts. You're staying outside of characters' minds. You're only relating the story. He went to the store. He got a candy bar. He walked home. He was happy. That would be a limited third-person point of view. We're seeing into one major character's point of view. We're not seeing into the store owner's point of view or the people that this person passed walking home. We're just seeing into the major characters. That'd be a limited third-person point of view. For an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, think about these different points of view and watch for a shift. There is a shift where we're seeing kind of a more global perspective in everyone's points of view, and in a singular perspective, a limited perspective, into one of the characters' point of view. Now, at the Round Earth's Imagined Corners, I'm not going to tell you what point of view it is, but just remember those limitations. Are we hearing the story directly from a character, or is somebody outside the story telling us the story? If it's outside the story telling us the story, it's third person. If it's from the person's point of view, it's first person. We have second person point of view. We're not going to be reading any second person point of view stories. This is the you perspective. Instead of he went to the candy bar or I went to the candy bar, it's you went to the candy bar. You went to the store to buy a candy bar. You walked home. You were happy. Now, you've seen these in recipe books, self-help books, those, chess for dummies kind of books. Choose Your Own Adventures. I don't know if anybody ever read those. Those were a second-person point of view. It definitely results in attention getting directness, and it also makes the reader more involved in the story because they're talking about you. We're not reading any you stories or second-person stories, just first and third person. All right, that's what we got for setting and point of view. I hope you enjoy the stories from this week. I think they all have amazing settings. They have interesting points of view. Ask yourself, how is the author using the setting? Ask yourself, which point of view is being employed? And then finally, what those decisions do for the stories themselves.